Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really exciting. We're going to completely shatter an illusion and uncover the absolutely profound intellect of a historical giant, someone who, honestly, most of the world completely misunderstands. I'm talking about Mevlana, who you probably know as Rumi. But here's the thing. If you think you know him from, say, a coffee mug quote, a trendy yoga studio wall, or maybe a modern romance novel, well, prepare to have your reality totally dismantled. Because we're actually looking at a brilliant, deeply academic spiritual master. His true teachings, they've been practically buried under a mountain of modern misinterpretation.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just look at the stark contrast we're dealing with here. On one side, we've got the pop culture version of Rumi. You know the one, a superficial, highly romanticized, and almost secularized poet that modern audiences just eat up. But on the exact opposite end, we have the real Mevlana. We're talking about a deeply traditional Islamic scholar, an immensely powerful intellect, and a master of incredibly complex mystical theology. The source material we're digging into today expresses some serious frustration with this. Modern society has basically stripped away all his profound academic and religious context and replaced it with this easily digestible, watered-down caricature.
Section 1. The Rumi Fallacy in Pop Culture, Shattering the Illusion. So to really get who Mevlana was, we first need to understand exactly how his legacy got so twisted. Essentially, what we're seeing are the consequences of taking complex, 13th century mystical and allegorical texts and trying to read them through a highly literal, totally secular, 21st century lens. It just doesn't work.
There are a few major traps people fall into today. First off, his works get reduced to basic romance. Think of novels like Elif Shafak's, which completely glosses over the hardcore spiritual discipline at the center of his teachings. Second, people read his metaphors literally. When he writes about intoxication or love, modern readers often think he's talking about a weekend party or a summer romance. They totally miss that it's actually an allegorical reference to divine ecstasy. And honestly, worse still, Western culture has really appropriated his poetry, pulling verses completely out of context to falsely claim he was this advocate for modern secular ideologies. As our source points out, this extreme distortion isn't just a little bit wrong. It literally places the pop culture Rumi at the exact opposite end of the spectrum from the real, deeply ascetic and devout Mevlana.
Section 2. Resurrecting Cultural Heritage, Accessing Authentic Literature. So if the popular version is just a myth, how do we actually access the real Mevlana today? Well, we have to look at the heavy lifting being done by some truly dedicated institutions. It means going all the way back to the original heavyweight commentaries. And thankfully, there's some incredible cultural resurrection happening right now to make that a reality.
14. That is a massive number. It represents the breathtaking 14-volume Mesnevi Sherhi, or Mesnevi commentary, written by the brilliant scholar Ahmed Avni Konuk. But here is the mind-blowing part. This monumental academic work just sat unpublished in the archives for nearly 80 to 100 years. For a century, the actual antidote to the whole pop culture Rumi illusion was literally just gathering dust.
And that brings us to the concept of true cultural power. I mean, why did a masterpiece sit unpublished for a century? It comes down to economics. A standard commercial publisher simply can't afford the massive initial capital it takes to risk printing a 14-volume academic commentary. True cultural power happens when municipalities, like the Konya municipality, and academic institutions, like Ibn Khaldun University, step in to fund and distribute these massive, high-quality historical texts. By subsidizing this work, they're essentially resurrecting our intellectual culture, making the authentic, unadulterated source material finally accessible to people who truly want to learn.
Section 3. The Allegory of the King and the Slave Girl, the ultimate test case. Now, what's really interesting here is that we're going to look at a specific and, honestly, highly controversial-sounding allegory from the Mesnevi. This story is the ultimate test case to prove the immense, hidden depth of Mevlana's work, and it shows exactly why reading him literally is a massive mistake.
Let's just walk through the literal, surface-level story step by step. So, powerful king falls in love with a beautiful slave girl, but suddenly the girl falls terribly ill, her face losing all its color. The king brings in a master doctor who takes her pulse, asks about her past, and discovers her heart is actually racing because she's secretly in love with a handsome young man from the city of Samarkand. So what does the king do? He uses his vast wealth to bring the young man to the palace and unites them. The girl miraculously heals, but then, shockingly, the king orders the doctor to slowly poison and kill the young man. Now, to an untrained modern eye, this sounds totally bizarre, hyperworldly, and frankly, really cruel. In fact, critics actually use literal readings of stories just like this to accuse Mevlana of writing inappropriate or immoral tales.
Section 4. The True Meaning of the Allegory, Decoding the Metaphor.
Remember what we said about those literal lenses? Well, our source author confesses that while reading the commentary on this specific story, his own perspective was shattered about 20 times in just 30 pages. So, buckle up and prepare yourself for a massive paradigm shift as we decode the metaphor that's hiding right in plain sight.
Before we can actually decode this, you're going to need two critical concepts in your toolkit. First up is zahir ilim, which basically translates to outward, worldly, or purely academic knowledge. And second is nefis, which represents the human ego, our pride, and our base worldly desires. Keep those two firmly in mind. And this brilliantly illustrates the true genius of Mevlana. Let's look at how these elements actually map out underneath the surface. In this allegory, the king represents God. The slave girl, she's actually the human mind. Now, the mind has fallen terribly ill because it's trapped in the sickness of the ego, those base, worldly desires and materialism we just talked about. The doctor represents a spiritual guide. When the guide checks the mind's pulse, he realizes the mind desires the handsome young man, who actually represents outward academic knowledge. So God allows the mind to pursue outward knowledge. Why? Because studying and gaining knowledge elevates the mind away from purely base desires, like partying or chasing wealth. So the mind gets healthy. But then, God kills the young man. What this actually means is God removes the veil of outward, ego-driven knowledge so the mind can finally achieve ultimate, pure divine truth. It is just a breathtaking psychological and spiritual map.
Section 5. The struggle between knowledge and ego. The trap of knowledge. Let's see how this all builds into a deeply profound psychological lesson about our very own egos. Because you see, while outward knowledge cured the mind's lowest, most base desires, that exact same knowledge eventually became a brand new trap.
Gaining worldly knowledge can so easily become a trap of its own. As the commentary points out, why do most people even learn things in the first place? Initially, sure, it might be for the truth, but pretty soon the ego takes over. We learn so we can show off. We memorize all these facts purely out of the fear of having to admit, hey, I don't know. We seek academic prestige and fancy titles, not for actual wisdom, but just to protect our pride. That young man from Samarkand representing outward knowledge has to be killed in the allegory because the ego uses intellectualism to totally block true spiritual enlightenment. The mind literally has to let go of its intellectual arrogance to actually perceive the divine.
And that brings us to a really powerful realization, beautifully articulated by our source. When you're faced with the immense, staggering intellect of a scholar like Mevlana, you just have to admit, my teacup is small, and this man is way too big to fit in my teacup. Often, when modern readers encounter a complex historical text they don't instantly understand, they approach it with envy or haset. They criticize it just to protect their own ego. But the proper approach to history's greatest minds is husnuzan, which means good faith. If you read something that seems odd, assume that the master who wrote it is operating on a level of mapping the human psyche that you simply haven't reached quite yet.
So, the crucial point is this. The pop culture version of Mevlana asks absolutely nothing of you but to feel good. The real Mevlana, he demands that you confront your ego, rethink all your assumptions, and actually elevate your mind. As you look at the brilliant historical text that shaped our world, I want to leave you with this question. Will you approach history's greatest minds with the envy and arrogance of a small teacup, or will you have the humility to let their profound wisdom completely shatter your reality? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and whatever you do, never settle for just the surface level.